Many American diplomats and politicians are scurrying for cover today after WikiLeaks editor Julian Assange pulled the curtain back on many of the United States' most sensitive negotiations with other nations, including North Korea, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. Some top lawmakers are even calling for WikiLeaks founder Assange, who has been on this program before, to be prosecuted as a terrorist. But not our first guest. Scott Horton is the editor of antiwar.com. He joins us now. Scott, welcome to Freedom Watch. So what did WikiLeaks reveal over this Thanksgiving weekend, and why is the government crying foul?
Well, they revealed hundreds of thousands, or the beginning of leaks of hundreds of thousands of documents on topics, wide-ranging topics. Overall, I think what emerges most is the arrogance of the American empire and the people who run it, whether it's the previous administration or this one, and the way they look down on everyone in the world. It's certainly not the kind of attitude you would expect from the foreign policy department of a humble commercial republic. It's a world empire that considers even our best allies to be sort of less than us.
Were you surprised when Yemeni president is quoted as saying to General David Petraeus, you say it's our bombs and we'll pretend it's ours? In other words, let's lie to the public about who's actually dropping bombs trying to kill these people in Yemen?
Well, there's not much of a surprise there. That is how they operate. And I'll call your attention, Judge, to the fact that 1 year ago, when Barack Obama gave his speech at West Point announcing the July 2011 phony date for the beginning of the end of the Afghan war, he said, Yemen, Somalia, look out, you're next. And in fact, we'd been bombing Yemen and calling it the Saudis, calling it the Yemeni's own government bombing them, all throughout last November and December in the weeks leading up to the Christmas Day attack last year. And then everybody pretended that Christmas Eve was the first day of history, and no one could explain why anyone in Yemen would want to bomb anything in America. But in fact, Amnesty International showed the cluster bomb units and still duds laying on the ground waiting to kill more innocent people, as a house full of women and children was bombed last December, a week and a half before the Christmas Day attack.
When this type of information is exposed, does the government admit it? Does the government change tactics? Is transparency good? Or does the public say, oh, well, what do you expect? It's the government. They're not going to tell us the truth. Stated differently, does any good come from exposing this type of behavior?
Well, absolutely, the public has a right to know. Whether they'll act on the information in these documents, I guess, remains to be seen, what kind of reaction there really will be. But I mean, there are some really outrageous things in these documents and things that really ought to get the American people upset. For example, the Israelis are shown to push continually to get the United States into a war with Iran. There's one State Department document from August of 2007 where Meir Dagan, the head of the Israeli Mossad, is telling Assistant Secretary of State Burns that even though the CIA's assessment of Iran's nuclear program and ours, that is Israel's, are different, that doesn't really matter. We have our deadline, and if you don't go ahead and attack, we will. And so that's really blackmail right there, because, of course, if the United States wanted to start a war with Iran, they could at least try to do it their way. But if Israel starts a war with Iran, America will be involved no matter what. He's basically threatening to drag us in kicking and screaming. Right. And, of course, we have thousands of troops stationed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Understood.
We have the fleet in the Persian Gulf that are greatly at risk in any real war with Iran.
We have less than a minute to go. I want your take on this. What do you say to people who say, like a lot of members of Congress in both parties, this jeopardizes the lives of innocent Americans and people will die as a result of this revelation?
Well, you know, that's what they said after the Afghan and Iraq war logs were leaked, and yet Secretary of Defense Gates admitted in a letter to Senator Levin that no one has died. There's no evidence that there's any blood on WikiLeaks' hands. There's blood on the hands of the American Pentagon and the American State Department that are waging these wars around the world. And it's not the truth that hurts, Judge. It's the truth. It's what the truth is about. You know, the real story. That's what hurts them. They're not worried about blood. They're worried about pink slips. They're worried about being held responsible for the crimes that they commit in our names.
Scott Horton, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I condemn the action that WikiLeaks has taken. It puts at risk our national security, but in a more concrete way. It puts at risk individuals who are serving this country in a variety of capacities, either as diplomats, as intelligence assets. It puts at risk the relationships that we have with important allies.
That was Attorney General Eric Holder earlier today commenting on the WikiLeaks release, saying that they do risk our national security. And military and diplomatic arms of the U.S. government are not adverse to using censorship to cloak their activities. U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer is an analyst of military matters who's had his own writings about intelligence heavily redacted and who has been a whistleblower himself. And he joins us now with his reaction to the latest WikiLeaks controversy. Colonel Schaefer, it's always a pleasure. You know I respect you. I respect your education. I respect your dedication to the country. I respect your risking your life to keep us safe. And on some of these things, you and I agree and you and I disagree. Who was harmed by embarrassing American diplomats and showing them in their more candid moments?
I agree with your previous guest about 90% of what he says. The arrogance, as you pointed out, I've been fighting. This morning I met with a congressional staffer for a major leader. I'll be meeting with a whistleblowing organization when I'm done here. But I'm fighting my own battle constantly regarding whistleblowing. I don't feel this was a legitimate whistleblowing event by WikiLeaks, and this is why. I believe the intent here was to cause damage to our ability to conduct military and diplomatic operations globally. So while I disagree with Attorney General Holder regarding the individuals being at risk, I don't think that's going to happen here. The longer-term relationships, Judge, with the Yemenis, with the Pakistanis, I do believe was damaged by this revelation.
All right, if the American government were dropping bombs on people it believes that are training for acts of terrorism in Yemen and pretending it was the Yemen government itself that was doing it, doesn't the American public have the right to know that? Wouldn't you, as an author and whistleblower, a man of extreme intellectual honesty, be yearning to reveal the truth if you knew that?
Well, honestly, I've known for a while that we were the ones behind the bombings. I've heard this from a number of rumors, and the idea was here, judges, not that the American public didn't have the right to know. I think the method necessary to achieve victory, and this is the thing, this is what my balancing act is on this, why I believe this rationalization is adequate. The idea here was we were making progress going after real threats. Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula has been identified as a real credible threat. Anwar al-Awlaki and his efforts have been successful in mounting attacks not only against this country, against the Saudis. With that said, then, I believe, there's a saying in the intelligence community, sometimes you have to hide the truth to get the truth. In this case, the awful truth was we were doing the work the Yemenis were taking credit for. I believe in this instance it was adequate.
You mentioned Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Last week, the King of Saudi Arabia was here in New York City for back surgery. Last night, we learned that many of his wealthy friends and colleagues in Saudi Arabia are financing Al-Qaeda. Isn't that something we want to know?
Well, and see, in this instance, I think that is something that should have been revealed, because that does not go against any foreign policy issues that I'm aware of. But the fact that we knew about it and failed to take action, I am with you and your previous guest. This is something we should look at. The $52 million that one of the senior members of the Afghan government walked out with. Something should be done on that as well.
Where did he get that cash from? If he had been an American on an American plane, they would have assumed there was something illicit. Nobody walks around with $52 million in cash. They let him go because he was in the government.
But this is the thing, Judge. There's a fine line. There's a fine line between acting on those things, which you and I would agree 110%, those should be looked at. The issue I'm concerned with is our ability to deal with the Pakistanis and their nuclear issue. You and I have talked about this both on and off air. And this is something that we have to look at, and this is where I do believe there's a legitimate role. Again, I'm spending a lot of my personal time even now trying to get whistleblowing issues, both my personal and other ones, examined. The question becomes, where is that balance? I do believe in this case, up until now, WikiLeaks has been kind of on the right path. The previous disclosures were bad but not critical, just kind of filling in the details of things we already knew. In this case, I do believe, at least in some instances, they crossed the line and have indeed put in jeopardy our ability to conduct military operations in the future.
How do these documents get out there? I mean, somebody on the inside steals them. That's the crime. Then they give them to WikiLeaks or the New York Times. Publishing them is not the crime. It's the theft that's the crime. Can't the government keep its own house in order?
Well, that's great point, Judge. Look at the fact that the government knew about this issue coming. They had to know this was coming, and yet they spent $47,000 to destroy the first print of my book. Keep in mind that the information here, the classification of this information, is the same in the DOD's eyes as in my book, which is lunacy. So the DOD has a real problem with understanding what should be protected and what's not. And more importantly, Judge, as you and I both know, they have not moved into the 21st century. Virtually anybody with network access could have done this. In the case, the accused here, Private Manning, apparently had a significant amount of access and was able to do this in a very short amount of time, putting it on something probably was about this size, put this in his pocket and walk out.
Colonel
so
Schaefer,
the DOD's got to get a handle on this.
Pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
China and Russia launch an attack on the United States without firing a shot. Are you ready for this? Peter Schiff on the declaration of war on the dollar. Next.